Aloha, brothers and sisters of the World Commission on Environmental Law and the judges who I have had the great pleasure to learn from, and the judges who will be facing climate change. Today I'll be speaking about the role of judges in climate change, and the reason I say aloha is because I come from the Supreme Court of a small state in the United States, but it's a treasure for the whole world, and that is Hawaii. In the mind of the collective human consciousness, Hawaii might be considered the ideal environment. So aloha recognizes the beauty of people, but it also recognizes the beauty of this incredible place that I come from, and I will confess anxiety as I speak to you about this issue. You may think it's anxiety because of the renegade president of the United States, but actually it's anxiety that I share with another president, our former President Barack Obama, who said that climate change is the greatest issue, the most important issue facing mankind. And coming from a president who has seen war and terrorism, human trafficking, it is an important statement that climate change is the greatest issue facing humanity. So today, in speaking about the role of judges and climate change, I would like to suggest a formula that's a very simple one. The formula is the environmental rule of law and courage. And this is a formula that judges can apply and have already applied in contending with the most important issue facing humanity, and that is climate change. If I speak a bit first about the nature of climate change, please forgive me because I know all of you understand it's a very important issue. But there's a new part of this climate change issue. It's the world of 3 degrees. It's the world of 2+ degrees. So as I speak about the role of judges, I do speak about the impending future that's different than the future most of the citizens of our planet are aware of. And it's a future that can be seen by a select few now. And of course, those are the eminent scientists of the world that include the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that advised all the countries of the world for the COP21 agreement that took place in Paris in April of 2015. And there's another group that can see this future in addition to the scientists. Some political leaders, the present leader of Germany, the leader of China, but the group that will be called upon to see the future of a 2 to 3 degree world on Earth, and has already been called to see the future, are the judges of the world. And they are judges that I am going to speak about, and their role as the front line for climate change. What about climate change as we approach the year 2100? Well, our population is approximately 7 billion. By the year 2100, it should be approximately 11 billion. And while that is happening, while the population is growing, with the present trajectory of emissions, we will reach a warming of our planet that was so important that it created this unprecedented agreement of the countries of the world in COP21, where all the countries of the world, except for one at that time, all the countries of the world agreed to their nationally determined contributions to take carbon out of the air. And why was such an agreement, such an historic agreement reached? Because at 2 degrees, the kind of damage to the ecosystems that support life on Earth would be so extreme that it would be unacceptable. It would be unacceptable if you follow the proposition that seems to have led contemporary human civilization, that we're supposed to transfer the planet to future generations, at least as good, in at least as good a condition as we have received it. This proposition brings up a very important principle that's a relatively new one in environmental law, the idea of intergenerational equity. And it's a principle that scientists, in their, if you will, anxiety that they share with, I know many of you in the audience and myself, have expressed in this term. As you probably know, Thomas Lovejoy was the originator of the concept of biodiversity, and he asks the question, will we commit the greatest intergenerational environmental injustice in the history of humanity by continuing to do something that is straightforward? It's a straightforward industrial process of emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Will we commit the greatest intergenerational environmental injustice that has ever been committed? Well, that's the trajectory. As this audience knows, that is the lawyers, the human beings that have become lawyers, many of them with a nature-driven commitment to protect the planet, as well as the judges who have these cases brought before them. They understand where we're headed. Are we going to comply with COP21? As we move past 2 degrees, because that is the consensus, we move past the 2 degrees that caused such anxiety for the President of the United States, such anxiety for the countries of the world at COP21. As we move past 2 degrees to a world that is a 3-degree world, what would that look like? Well, it's worth contemplating because it's extraordinary, and the judges who have to deal with climate change will be the visionaries, maybe unwitting, but the visionaries that get to see a 3-degree world, where the equatorial megacities, such as Karachi or Calcutta, are not inhabitable because of the heat, where the Amazon is so challenged with precipitation and loss of humidity, that fires break out, that create this robust cycle that increases the amount of carbon that goes into the air. Of course, the glaciers will disappear. Cities such as Osaka and Rio will be flooded. And my home, Hawaii, our major city that our economy depends upon, will be flooded. Extreme weather events will become common. Extreme weather events, generally speaking, for our planet at the moment, are considered to be moments that are unusual and frightening, but they'll become common. In my state, the number of hurricanes will increase by at least a third, which means that 120, 140 mile an hour wind will eventually, before the year 2100, hit Honolulu, blow out the windows of the skyscrapers, move past the skyscrapers to the watershed where our forest is, and destroy the watershed at 120 miles an hour. That is a small episode in the 3-degree world, in which the primary victims, of course, will be living things other than human beings, where we'll lose at least half of the species of the earth. But there is a species that we can all share a love for, a compassion for, a sense of extraordinary love for, and that is the children of the world that now number approximately 2 billion. Over 1 billion of those children live in poverty, and they are already the victims of climate change, with disease increasing. They will be part of the hundreds of millions of individuals that will turn into climate change refugees at 3 degrees. So we can see the problem. It's an extraordinary problem. It is the greatest problem facing the judges of the world, according to Antonio Benjamin, who is probably the most prominent jurist in the world on the issue of environmental law from the Supreme Court of Brazil. The most important issue, legal issue, facing the judges of the world, climate change. And it is coming directly for, climate change is coming directly for the men and women who are in positions as judges at this time. And they will be the vanguard, as many of you have already seen, for issues such as what kind of planet are we going to hand over to future generations? And I would submit to you that this is an extraordinary group of people who practice two very important methods of achieving environmental justice. And it's a simple formula. The environmental rule of law, the environmental framework that applies now to the earth throughout the world, which I'll get to in a moment, and a second quality. A quality that's necessary when you see the impending peril that will reach us by the year 2100. It's an essential quality that's necessary when you see who are the advocates for maintaining the present level of carbon emissions. That is a powerful group of interests in the world. Those that are embedded in and those that would support, contrary to the environmental rule of law, continued emissions of carbon. You have the environmental rule of law and courage. What about the environmental rule of law? We have soft law, which is magnificent. We have soft law, the Rio Declaration. We have soft law, the Global Compact for the Environment that hopefully, with the help of President Macron from France, will be endorsed by the General Assembly of the United Nations. We have the Brazil Declaration on Water Justice. Principles that evolve into hard law, evolve into statutes and laws. They evolve into the highest level, the most powerful level of environmental rule of law, which of course are the constitutions. And what about the constitutions of the world? They have moved to provide a tool to the judges of the world into the realm of the right to a clean and healthy environment. The right to life, as interpreted by the Supreme Court of India and the Great Green Tribunal, with Justice Swatantra Kumar, who has led with courage on the issue of environmental rule of law in India. Developed the principle that the right to life includes a right to a clean and healthy environment. And the principle that has moved forward in India of recognizing the extraordinary connection between natural areas such as the Ganges and the Yamuna River that were declared personalities with a human legal identity that must be protected. New Zealand has followed that course as well. Intergenerational equities become hard law in the Philippines, where children brought an action to protect future generations from illegal forestation. And as you know, the Great Agenda case was decided in The Hague that recognized the legal requirement of countries to follow their duty loosely based on the commitments at COP21, to follow their duty to take carbon out of the air. And I would like to mention an extraordinary development in the law that has taken place in the year 2016 in my country, the United States, a country, as you know, that's led by an individual that poses a risk, a threat, at the executive level to the earth, to the control of global warming. And this case from the judicial branch of the United States, from Judge Ann Aiken, it's called Juliana versus the United States, followed essentially the analysis of Urgenta in a way that is profound for our country and represents the movement of the environmental rule of law forward because of the courage of a judge. Because she decided under the United States Constitution that every single citizen of the United States enjoys a fundamental right. And I don't use that term loosely, a fundamental right. And there are not that many that have that level of protection in the United States. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press, fundamental rights. Now, a fundamental right to a stable climate capable of supporting human life. This is an enforceable right in the United States that she articulated, based on, of course, principles of intergenerational equity, based on principles of public trust, based on principles that are well known to those judges who have, and whether it has created anxiety in their life or whether it has created inspiration, who have had to deal with the 2 to 3 degree future that we are approaching, where the children of the world and half the life of the planet are going to be severely impacted in a way that in legal terms can be considered imminent damage, imminent peril, requiring remedies. Which brings me to the application of this formula of the environmental rule of law and courage. The application in the crucible, if you will, in the realm, if you will, in this special, culturally prized, culturally identified realm throughout the world called the court, the judiciary. What happens in this crucible? Science is brought to the judge. The damage is brought to the judge. And of course, the Constitution or the statutory framework, which is an exciting part of our future. The statutory framework that includes concepts such as the Endangered Species Act, environmental impact statements. These are the tools that are applied by the judges in the courtroom. In this crucible, in this courtroom, it's necessary, of course, to have a skill set that can empower in terms of knowledge, but empower in terms of courage too, to understand what's happening. What are the judges facing? I ask you to consider a very important statistic that the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Environmental Rights has recently provided to the world community, and that's John Knox. And John's report, having to do with the issue of environmental defenders, helps define the kind of urgency and the kind of intensity that the men and women judges of the earth have to contend with. John's report was focused on this concept of an environmental defender. That is a term specifically defined under the United Nations of an individual that steps forward to defend the environment. A few years ago, it was 3 people a week that were murdered. Now it's 4 individuals a week that are murdered defending the environment. Now consider what happens often before they are worthy of that type of violent action. What often happens before an environmental defender loses their life is they take an action to court. Oh, so you can see that the men and women who are judges are contending with a growing urgency and intensity of issues. And to deal with that level of intensity that involves an epic level of human life, an epic level of justice, the community of judges has gathered together to institutionalize, if you will, our collaboration to be able to meet the challenge, stand and not retreat to the 2 to 3 degree world that is coming. And what are these institutions? Environmental courts, the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment. Environmental courts are an extraordinarily powerful tool that India and China have embraced. India and China have developed courts in which judges are trained in the science of environmental law. Not only do they receive special focus on the environmental law, but the science that pertains to it, in particular, of course, climate change. After being trained, they are assigned to a court where they can develop expertise because that is their court. So as time goes on, they have the experience and they develop the capacity, such as the great judge of Pakistan, Mansour Ali Khan, the capacity to order the government, for example, to come up with, to develop a climate change action plan. And in the case of Laghari in Pakistan, the court also ordered that there be continuing jurisdiction so the court could oversee the development of this climate change plan. Environmental courts. They've developed in countries around the world. In the United States, we have one environmental court that has civil and criminal jurisdiction and covers areas of land, air, and water, and that, it might be a surprise to you to learn, is in our little 1.4 million state of Hawaii. And this institution is growing, environmental courts. The Global Judicial Institute on the Environment. Active judges with a commitment, with an interest, and with an assignment to make decisions in areas of the environmental rule of law, the most pressing of issues facing judges of the world. Global Judicial Institute in the Environment already is comprised of judges from all the regions of the world. And again, it's to collaborate. Again, it's the idea of equipping and protecting the role of the judge. So let me conclude by sort of returning to this idea of the role of judge in climate change at the time that we're in, where we have a 2 to 3 degree world approaching. There's no more exciting time to be a judge. And as we've discussed, the environmental rule of law is inconsistent with the 2 to 3 degree world. The framework, the present framework, whether you're talking about constitutional or statutory or common law or code law, the present framework is inconsistent with the 2 to 3 degree world. Therefore, the cases that are being brought are bringing judges into what might be the most exciting time to be a judge. So the independence of the judiciary, the idea of protecting the men and women as they make these decisions becomes paramount. So I am most grateful to every member of the World Commission on Environmental Law, because I have had the great inspiration of working with the lawyers that comprise the International Union for the Conservation of Nature Commission on Environmental Law. And from our state, it's been humbling to be around the great nations of the world, Brazil, India, China, Norway, Pakistan, to learn from the magnificent judges who are applying the formula that judges can apply in this time of climate change. The environmental rule of law and courage. So aloha, and thank you very much for your work. And I look forward to us moving forward together at this very exciting time.